the last time I saw my grandmother alive was in the first day of spring in 2008 in rural Maine, and there was a blizzard. And I know it was the first day of spring because I was on spring break from college. And it was my senior year. I went to college in Iowa, and I thought, spring break, where should I go? Like the beach or somewhere that's not Iowa. Or, but I thought, no, I'm going to go to my grandparents' house in rural Maine. That is my idea of a spring break. And I told my family about this. I told my parents, I told my brother about it, and they were like, you know, most families would be like, oh, that's really sweet, that's really great. My family was like, what are you doing? That's a terrible idea. You're going for how long? You're going for a week? Are you sure? Are you okay? What's wrong? Because my family is not like a family. We're more like a collection of individuals who apparently gave birth to one another, and now like occasionally speak to one another. And like my immediate family, how we eat dinner together is we all read a different book, or how we go see movies together is we all go to the movie theater at the same time, but then see a different movie. But I was on this kick. I was really thinking about, I was a senior in college. My whole life was changing, and I was thinking, like, at what point do you take responsibility for your relationship to your family? I thought all families kind of didn't like each other and all sort of hated each other. And then in college, I met people who were actually liked their families and hung out with them and had relationships with their grandparents. And I was like, I haven't seen my grandparents in 8 years. Is that a problem? Should I see my grandparents? And so, because when I was growing up, when you're a kid, you're like dragged along to the family reunions. I was dragged along to a family reunion like every, 4 or 5 years or so, and would just like eat watermelon and like be sad because I have like 3 main cousins, and these days, one cousin is a professional surfer, and one's a professional rodeo cowboy, and one was voted the sexiest bartender in Boston. and I grew up in like penny loafers, like with a sci-fi book, So I would just go to family reunions, and they would just like call me a pussy and a dork, and I was like, but the only thing that bonded us all together as cousins was our dislike of our grandparents, because all the bartender, the cowboy, the surfer, and I can all agree that our grandparents are totally crazy, and they are like really old school 1930s folks who they had like a big rug covering their whole living room, except for like a little bit on the edge, except the rug was for company, so you weren't allowed to walk on it. So we'd spend like the whole time at the family reunion like edging around this rug. And my cousin one time was eating, just sitting in the kitchen eating grapes. And my grandpa comes in, and he's just like, what are you doing? You're eating grapes wrong. You take a bunch, and you leave. And that's the kind of thing they would get mad about. So when I told my family that I was going to go spend a week in rural Maine with my grandparents, they were like, well, don't forget to pack some grapes. That's what they said. So I take the train, and I take another train, and then I get a ride out to my grandparents' house, which is in rural Maine, which is on an island, an inescapable island, which you have to take a ferry to get there. So it's like once you're on the island, you're like on the island and you can't get off. And there's like 3 stores there. There's one store that sells milkshakes, and there's one store that's like the video store / grocery store / deli, and then there's like a post office. But the first one was closed, so there's no milkshakes. So it's just the post office and the video store deli. And I get off the ferry, and it is like, have you been to Maine in March? Because it's like gray skies, gray horizon, gray trees. Everything is gray, and it's freezing cold. And I get to my grandparents' house, and I brought flowers because I didn't know what to do, because I was like, what do you do for your grandma if you haven't seen her in 8 years? You bring her flowers. So I get to the house, and I knock on the door, and I open the door, and the first thing she says, she hasn't seen me in 8 years. She doesn't give me a hug. We're not that kind of family. She's just like, what happened to your hair? And that's when I'm like, I've made a terrible mistake. I'm here for a week. What are you gonna do for like 7 days on an island in Maine when it's freezing cold and you don't really know who your grandparents are? So at first it was extremely excruciating, and then it was also still extremely excruciating. It turns out that in the 8 years that I hadn't seen my grandma, she had acquired a lot of dementia, and was really out of it. And my grandpa is still like very straight-laced. Like, he's one of those guys, you know how like before computers people could do everything, and he can like build stuff and cook stuff and sew stuff and knows about the world and can do math and and like knows about wine and can garden, and I'm like, what? These are skills. Anyway, so we get. I'm on my last day there, and I've gotten so bored that in our conversation between the times, I'm counting the seconds between our sentences. It's so quiet and it's so dull that when someone says like, I'll say like, "This is good turkey." Yes, it is. 7 seconds. It's really quiet and really cold. Anyway, so we're sitting there. And we're drinking this wine and we're talking and we're actually having a good conversation, and I'm kind of enjoying it. I'm kind of like talking to my grandparents about what they were doing when they were young, and it turns out they traveled around the world, and my grandma always felt weird about being both smart and tall, which I'm like, I know that's me. And so we're sitting there, we're having this conversation, it's just so slow and so dull, and then suddenly we're like just drinking wine, and then like the front door bursts open and this guy with an axe comes through, and I'm like, ah! And it's a fireman, and he's like, there's been a gas leak reported in this house, everybody has to get out. And so my grandma and my grandpa and I, first my grandpa says, oh, you've got that wrong, you've got the wrong house, because that's the way that he is. So we all go outside of the house, we all like get up and go outside of the house, and the whole fire department is there because there's nothing else to do on this island. The whole fire department is so excited. They're like, gas leak reported, we're going to the house. And we go outside and it's a blizzard. It's snowing, so it's snowing a ton, and there's all these firemen out there, and they're all really excited to be at the house, and they go inside and they look, and it's like, it turns out it was a false alarm, but they've broken down the door. It was a false alarm. But so they look at this timer and they're like, oh, actually it was just beeping and it's not really a problem. And my grandma starts talking to them about the house and about her history, and she's like, haven't you guys been here before? And the fireman says to her, like, oh, I've never been here before because I always remember a pretty face, and yours is beautiful. And I'm thinking about it, and what I think is, no, I didn't stay too long. I came too late. So, thank you.